أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فلما استيئسوا منه خلصوا نجيا قال كبيرهم ألم تعلموا أن أباكم قد أخذ عليكم موثقا من الله ومن قبل ما فرطتم في يوسف فلن أبرح الأرض حتى يأذن لي أبي أو يحكم الله لي وهو خير الحاكمين ارجعوا إلى أبيكم فقولوا يا أبانا إن ابنك سرق وما شهدنا إلا بما علمنا وما كنا للغيب حافظين واسأل القرية التي كنا فيها والعير التي أقبلنا فيها وإنا لصادقون رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي فالحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Once again everyone, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. It's a bit of a tall order today, but again, I'm not going to put too much pressure on myself and be in a rush to finish. We'll do what we can. But the ambitious goal today is to try to cover lessons from ayahs number 80, 81, and 82. Now the conversation with Yusuf alayhi salam is done. He's insisting that he's going to keep Binyamin with him. And this ayah that we're about to get into has lots of components. It's a long ayah. If you're looking at the text in front of you, then you can see that. So what I'm going to do is kind of translate it piece by piece and move the story along instead of giving you the overall translation first. So let's get started. فَلَمَّا اسْتَيْأَسُوا مِنْهُ when eventually they lost all hope from him. So lamma in Arabic, which is what I'm translating here, is when. I shifted the translation to eventually when, because lamma actually suggests tarahi. And the fa adds even more to that, meaning they tried convincing Yusuf alayhi salam one way or the other. Please, we beg you, sir, anything, any way you can get us to let Binyamin go. And he just wouldn't budge. And eventually they gave up all hope eventually. Now, ya'isu means they gave up hope. Istay'asu, the form that's used is the istif'al pattern. And istif'al, one of its benefits is mubalagha, which means they absolutely, utterly lost hope. It was 100%. It's like, he said no, but maybe he'll change his mind in an hour or two. Or maybe if we come back tomorrow, we beg him again. Looked like he wasn't totally saying no. There's sometimes you kind of like, somebody's saying no, but it's not an emphatic, absolutely not at all. But istay'asu means they had absolutely no hope left that Yusuf is going to budge from his position, alayhi salam. Incidentally, that reminds me of the previous ayah in number 79. There were three observations about the same phrase, the beginning phrase that I didn't make, and I'd like to share those with you real quick. When Yusuf alayhi salam said ma'adh Allah, that he clings to Allah. The first important thing to note is he is the highest government official in a non-Muslim society. So he's in this presidential or prime minister type position, sitting in that chair. Everybody around him pretty much is non-Muslim. And here he is invoking Allah's name in public office, in a place, in an environment where nobody believes in his religion. In fact, his previous declaration from prison was, I have left the religion of a people that don't believe in Allah and they are in denial about the afterlife. So that's the fact of the Egyptian society at the time, right? And yet he is calling on Allah, and it's as if he is introducing people around him to Allah without directly giving them da'wah, but the way in which he carries himself. That's the first observation, that he had no hesitation invoking Allah's name. This is important because, when people, lots of you listen to me from different parts of the world. And some parts of the world, you're in a Muslim society. So saying things like, Assalamu alaikum, alhamdulillah, mashallah, I'm grateful to Allah, it's a blessing from Allah. Saying things like that is completely normal. It's part of the culture, right? But then you are in an environment, maybe you're in an office, or you're in a university setting, or you're in a corporate setting in a non-Muslim country. And actually, it's even the case. It was surprising to me. I went to certain Muslim countries where they said acting Muslim now in certain offices is weird. So Muslim countries will have Christian, like Christmas holidays. In a majority, 80% Muslim country will have Christmas holidays, Christmas tree, all the whole works. And if you don't go to the party, you feel weird. And saying Assalamu alaikum feels awkward, and saying hello, good morning is more normal. Like that's what's being done to Muslim society. So Islam is almost becoming alien, even in the Muslim world in some cases, right? But here you have a man who's holding on to his Islam alone, and he doesn't feel awkward invoking Allah's name. And even if people around him, you can imagine many people don't know who this Allah is. They don't know. They have other visions of gods and deities. Maybe they haven't heard this name before. But the only time they hear this mention of this higher, unique one God that cannot be paralleled with anyone is on the tongue of Yusuf alayhi salam, which will make them inquisitive, isn't it? So he's actually using that platform, to not necessarily to preach to them, but to let them know where he stands. And also it inspires curiosity in the people that work under him. They already look up to him for his moral principles, right? For his character, from prison and onwards. The king is impressed. The prisoners are impressed. Society is impressed. And he's even saying, don't you see I always, fulfill the load? Don't you see that I'm always fair? Everybody's convinced of his fairness, right? And now he takes the opportunity to say, where does my fairness come from? Where does my sense of justice and my sense of doing the right thing every time, what's the source of it? What's the fuel behind it? And in the phrase ma'adallah, he invokes on Allah. So that's one important observation. Another important observation here is by saying ma'adallah, he's saying, I wouldn't do something wrong. Like remember he said, if we did that, we would be wrongdoers, right? What that tells us is he's actually, and Yusuf alayhi salam wouldn't just say that to win an argument. When he speaks genuinely. He is a siddiq. He is absolutely truthful, which means even though he's tricking them, this is entirely endorsed by Allah, and he has no questions in his conscience about, here I am tricking these guys, and yet I'm invoking Allah's name. There's a contradiction. In his mind and his heart, there's no contradiction. He can invoke on Allah's name. He can call on Allah's name and say that without giving it a second thought, because he understands that there is no contradiction. He is doing the right thing in this case. He's not doing absolutely anything wrong. So that's another important observation about ma'adallah. But the third, I think, is the most important observation. The law is that we are going to punish no one except the one who stole. That's the law of the land, right? But he doesn't invoke the law of the land and say, I will never, how dare I defy the king? How dare I defy the law of the land? He didn't invoke the law of the land and say, I will not be breaking the country's laws. He said, I will not be violating Allah. I will cling on to Allah. In other words, breaking the principles of justice is actually a violation against who? It's a violation against Allah. And my morality doesn't come from the fact that the laws are written here. The laws could be anything. The laws can be fair, that's fine. But the reason I abide by those laws is actually because of Allah. Not because of the laws, but because of Allah. That's actually who I fear. I don't fear breaking the laws. I fear not having the protection of Allah. This is a really different mindset, isn't it? Like in modern secular governments or pretend secular governments, there's this assumption that you have to abide by the law and religion is a separate entity. But even in the founding documents of a nation like the United States, in God we trust, and there's a constant invocation of God because they understood something. Morality and justice, its origins are not going to be rules and regulations that human beings create. At the end of the day, the reason someone will do the right thing is if they have a higher conscience, and that's their faith in Allah. That higher morality, that comes from Allah Azza wa Jal. So he's actually pointing out that source because, he's so different from everybody in Egypt. And he's in this most prominent position. He's already sticking out because he's so prominent. And on top of that, by character, he's so different. Well, what makes him so different must be a very common question. How is he this different? And how are people around him so influenced by him? And he kind of drops it here and there, ma'adallah, right? So it's a really beautiful, not only a conversation with him and his brothers who don't know that's his brother, but actually with the entire nation. And so those are just side observations. Now coming back, these brothers have lost complete hope that they're going to get anywhere with him. Okay? Khalasu najiya. So when they lost complete hope from him after lots of trying, khalasu means they went into solitude. But khalasu has two meanings. Khalasu could mean they went somewhere where they could be alone, right? So they're off the streets, or they're out in an alley somewhere, or they got themselves a room in some shady hotel or something, and got in a corner so they could sit and talk and regroup. Basically, what are we going to do now? And they can't talk openly about it. Now, why cannot they talk openly about it? You remember previously they had kind of become celebrities. They had been known, and even Father was saying, come in from different doors, right? Word had spread about them. Now the wrong kind of word has spread about them. The news about them is one of them is a thief. And we don't know who else is in on it. Maybe they were in on it, they just didn't get caught. And they let one of theirs get arrested. So now instead of having a good reputation in Egypt, they have a horrible reputation in Egypt. And if they're seen standing somewhere having a conversation, everybody wants to hear, and what else are they scheming? What else are they planning to do? So they're kind of, it's the opposite of what happened before. Now you imagine they used to walk around with pride, usba, we are a band, everybody else should get intimidated from us, who's going to mess with us? And now there they are going into hiding to find a safe place where they can talk to each other, how the tables have turned. And then there's the word, so, and the other meaning of khalasa, so khalasu is either they went, one meaning is they went alone somewhere, right? They're by themselves. The other meaning of khalasa is that they comes from takhallus, they freed themselves from every other concern. This was the only thing on their mind. This is all they're going to talk about. They've left every other idea. We came for food. We came to get, fulfill the load for our families. All of those subjects have disappeared. This is the only item on the agenda. And this is what they need to discuss. And then the word that comes after that is najiya, which is secret counsel, right? Surah Al-Mujadala actually has an entire section on just najwa, on secret counsel, on people meeting with each other privately, right? And it could be different kinds of it. إِذَا تَنَاجَيْتُمْ فَلَا تَتَنَاجَوْا بِالْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ وَتَنَاجَوْا بِالْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. Allah says, when you're going to meet secretly, don't meet to do sinful things. And have secret meetings to do good and to increase each other in taqwa, and to be more conscious of Allah. So, and in the same surah, Allah says, إِنَّمَا النَّجْوَى مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ. That secret meetings are actually from the shaitan. What that tells you is secret meetings in and of themselves have more potential of being harmful than beneficial. And so when you do have, usually you say something is beneficial, something is innocent until proven harmful or proven guilty. Something is harmless until you add something harmful to it, right? But secret meetings in the Quran's definition are reverse engineered. Secret meetings are by default harmful, unless you go out of your way to make sure that they are harmless. It's flipped. And that's something I've talked about in detail in Surah Al-Mujadala and the principles behind, najwa. But anyway, the word najiya here, again, two meanings. Najiya could be a masdar, which means an infinitive noun. What that means for the rest of you in human is they got together alone for the purpose of a secret meeting. A secret meeting. So to have a council among each other that nobody else will hear about. We need to discuss this somewhere we can talk and nobody hears. Fine. Najiya can also be an ism representing them. So naji can also be hum naji. For example, we say in the Quran, we read idhum najwa. When they were making secret counsel. The word najwa actually can represent people too. And najiyan can represent people too. So hum najiyun means they're all sitting together discussing secretly. So for the purpose of it, and as they were sitting there discussing. So the reason they wanted to be alone is to have this exclusive conversation. Now, obviously when they're having a secret conversation, that means they're saying things that can't be said out loud. Or that if people hear this, like, what are you saying? Right? They're not saying something innocent. They're not saying something so politically correct. And you remember there's different brothers and they all have different ideas. Remember the last time we saw a najwa from them? When we saw khalasu najiya, before the Quran said khalasu najiya, when they were by themselves, they said, Dad loves him more. He's lost and confused. We should kill him. Those are not the kinds of things you want anybody else hearing, right? So they're having this conversation. We don't know all of that conversation. But what Allah does is He tells us the last part of this conversation. He says, "Qala kabiruhum." Their big one said. The big one among them said. Now, what does that mean? The big one among them. One way of thinking about the big one among them is the eldest brother said, right? But the word kabir in the Quran, like in Surah Al-Ahzab, قالوا ربنا إنا أطعنا سادتنا وكبراءنا فأضلونا السبيل. On Judgment Day, people are going to come to Allah and say, "Oh Allah, we followed our leaders and our big ones, We followed our leaders and our what? Big ones. So they made us lose the path. That's what people are going to say on Judgment Day. Now, why am I citing that ayah from Surah Al-Ahzab about Judgment Day? Because it uses big ones, right? Now, what does that mean in the literary sense in the Quran and in ancient Arabic? One of the meanings of Kabir, we saw already, is someone who deserves respect. Isn't that what they call their father? Inna lahu aban shaykhan kabiran? Someone who deserves respect. But Kabir also means someone who commands authority, someone who's listened to, someone who's responsible. In fact, Ibrahim alayhi salam broke all the idols and he left the axe or the baseball bat, whatever it was, in the palm of the biggest idol. And then he said, ask the big one, ask the Kabir, right? Because he's responsible for all of your livelihoods. He's responsible for the skies and the earth, according to you. He's responsible for all the mini action figure gods you guys have. So, and if he's responsible for all of you, he should be definitely responsible for the temple, right? So ask him. That's what he said. So the word Kabir was used for someone who is held responsible. Now, what does that teach us? Well, the one who is in the end the eldest, or maybe it's the same person. Not only is he the oldest, he's the one at the end responsible. He's the one who convinced dad to let Binyamin go. And when they go back, dad's not going to ask everybody. He's going to ask the one responsible. Weren't you the one who took him? Weren't you the one who took responsibility in the end? Everybody else chimed in with you, but you're the leader, de facto leader. So the word Kabir suggests that one has to take chief responsibility. There's a group of them, and they're all throwing their opinions, but now he's saying the final word. Now his final word is interesting because when you pay attention to what somebody's saying, you can actually decipher that they're not speaking in a vacuum. What I mean by that is somebody could say something and you can tell what they're saying is a response to something else. Just give you an example. Let me make it super simple. If you just walked by and you hear somebody on the phone and they say, yes, absolutely, you know that they didn't call someone and the first thing they said was, yes, absolutely. They heard something and they're responding to it by saying what? Yes, absolutely. So those words are not the initial conversation. They are a response to something that already happened, right? And that's a very basic example. But here, from the way that the language is carried or captured of his speech, you can tell other conversation has happened. And he's responding to other things that are being thrown around. So let's first hear what he says and then decipher what could be thrown around before it, okay? So he says, قَالَ كَبِيرُهُمْ, the big one among them said, أَلَمْ تَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ أَبَاكُمْ قَدْ أَخَذَ عَلَيْكُمْ مَوْثِقًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ. Don't you already know? Haven't you already known that your father has already taken a covenant, a sacred promise from Allah, meaning invoking Allah? وَمِن قَبْلُ مَا فَرَّطْتُمْ فِي يُوسُفَ. Actually, I'll do that part later. Don't you already know that your father has taken a promise invoking Allah from you? You don't know that? Why would he talk like that? You don't know that you took a promise with Allah? Don't you already know that? What did it not happen? Did you forget? When somebody says, don't you know? Don't you know? This is different from don't you remember. Don't you remember is said when someone forgets something. Don't you know is said when someone pretends they don't know it at all. Like they don't know it exists. Do you not know this is our address? Do you not know this is here? This is a much more critical way of saying, don't you remember? Did you forget? Did you forget assumes innocence. But if you said, seriously, you don't know? You don't, and that's actually, you're incriminating somebody. You know what that means? Maybe because what do we know so far? When Binyamin's accusation came out, what did they say? Well, what a surprise. I mean, if he stole. Not entirely shocked. He had a brother with the same problem. Remember that? And it's not like they're coming out and trying to rescue him for himself, but they're only pleading on behalf of who? The father. They don't really care for him. So some of them in this private meeting are like, well, I mean, we tried, but, you know, I'm not that broken up about it. If you're asking me if I'm going to cry about it, I'm not, because good riddance. Seriously, this was like Yusuf 2.0, so, I mean, it's not that bad. Oh, well. Like, I mean, we're not lying this time, so it's okay. I mean, what are you going to do? And some of them are like, you know, okay, we tried. It's okay, no big deal. And they're about to kind of brush it off. And they're letting this slide off like it doesn't affect them in any way. But one of them, the responsible one, something is happening. And this is actually the crux of these ayat. Something is happening to him. He has disobeyed his father, and he has hurt his father's feelings for so long. And he has seen the pain and suffering of his father for so long. And he's over, sometimes you do the wrong thing and you try not to think about it. And so long as you put it in a shelf in the back of your mind somewhere and you close that shelf, you can compartmentalize it, you can carry on. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to deal with it. You just have to ignore it and deliberately ignore it and shelf it to the side, and you can actually function in everything else and be completely fine. It won't bother your conscience because you don't have to face it. And sometimes for people like that, if they are confronted with it, they get very uncomfortable. If they're confronted with what is bothering their conscience, they say, I don't want to have this conversation. Can we stop? You know what? I'm walking away. Because it's something that they know they're doing wrong, but they don't want to face it, right? It seems the oldest brother knows he's done a lot of wrong, but he tells himself, I'm doing this to pay, provide for the family. This is what we have to do. Okay, whatever happened. We have to look ahead. I have too much responsibility to think about what happened in the past. I can't deal with that right now. I have too many other responsibilities. He is their kabir, right? But now when Binyamin is gone, something in him, that shelf, the lock that it had, broke. And now the pain that he's causing his father is confronting him. Even though dad's not in front of him, the pain that he's about to cause his father and the hurt that he's caused him is hitting him. And maybe he was the one who told Yusuf, we have an old father who's very respectable. And even if you're saying that to convince Yusuf, sometimes when you're talking to somebody else, you don't realize you end up talking to yourself too. Right? So your mouth is saying it, but now for the first time, your heart is hearing it. Because sometimes we say things and they're not coming from our heart, right? But sometimes somebody else says something and it hits our heart. But you know what's crazy sometimes? You're saying something and it hits your own heart. It comes out of your mouth and hits your own heart. Maybe that's happened to him. And it's shaken him. And for the first time, when they're throwing about, oh, well, it is what it is. I mean, one less burden for us. Which one of you liked him? Nobody liked him anyway, so it's okay. Dad'll get over it. Dad's, he's crying about Yusuf all the time anyway. It's not like he's happy. So it's not like anything's changed. So they're justifying, and now he couldn't take it. We're not going to do this to our father. I can't do it anymore. You guys, whatever you do. So he turns to them in a critical way, and he says, didn't you already know that he took a covenant, our father took a covenant from you? He and invoked Allah min Allah. You don't know that? How can you talk like that? How can you think like that? Now, in his words, what I noticed is there's a couple of things here that are worthy of notice from a psychological point of view. And from what it's a big word, but I'll make it easy for you guys to understand. It's called intertextuality. Now, intertextuality means that when you're reading a text, in this case, Surah Yusuf is one text, yeah? You're reading something later on in the text that is connected to something previously in the text. So there's a connection in the text, not just from the ayah before or the ayah right after or the phrase right after, but something way back. There's connections, right? And sometimes I show you those intertextual kinds of connections. There's lots of intertextuality in his words. Now, why is that important to note? It seems, even though he's been on the wrong side of this for a while, the words of his father have started to, it's like water dripping on a rock. And the rock is hard and the water is soft and it can't do anything. But when water drips enough, it can even make a hole over time in a rock. And it can make the surface of a rock bald. It can do that, right? So it seems the water has gone through. So why am I saying that? Listen to this. أَلَمْ تَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ أَبَاكُمْ قَدْ أَخَذَ عَلَيْكُمْ مَوْثِقًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ. Haven't you known that your father already took a covenant from you from Allah? مَوْثِقًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ. مَوْثِقًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ. What did his father say, Yaqub alayhi salam, in ayah number 66, before they left on this trip? لَنْ أُرْسِلَهُ مَعَكُمْ. I will not send him with you حَتَّى تُؤْتُونَ مَوْثِقًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ. Until you give me a covenant beseeching or invoking Allah, from Allah. Same exact phrasing echoed by the father is now being echoed by the son. He's saying the words that he heard the father say. They're still ringing in his head, and now he's making his brother's ears ring with those words. Mawthiqan min Allah. He's repeating those words. And then he says, فَلَمَّا آتَوْهُ مَوْثِقٌ قَالَ اللَّهُ عَلَى مَا نَقُولُ وَكِيلٌ. When they all gave him their word, their covenant, what did Yaqub alayhi salam say? Allah is watching over, Allah is the disposer over what we have said. Allah will watch over what we said. Allah is the reliable party over what we said. Do you not realize you invoked Allah and you made this promise with your father? Have you just forgotten? And by the way, there's two things that have happened here. He brought up his concern for dad, and he brought up his concern that we've made a sacred promise that sources back to Allah. So there's an emotional reconnection with father that we're noticing now in this older brother, but we're also noticing there's a spiritual awakening. He's connecting back to Allah. He didn't just say, Dad made us promise. He repeated that promise was guaranteed, and he made us take this promise seriously because he invoked Allah in that promise. Mawthiqan min Allah. But he doesn't stop there. He says, وَفَرَّطْتُمْ وَمِنْ قَبْلُ مَا فَرَّطْتُمْ فِي Yusuf. Now this is where there's lots to talk about, but because I'm on the subject of echoes, I'll deal with that first. So one of its translations, don't you know what you did? Don't you know your transgressions? What lines you crossed, and how you went? What you fell short of in what you did with Yusuf? He's reminding them of not Binyamin, but of Yusuf. So long ago, min qabl. So now these people, do they ever talk about Yusuf? No. The only time they talked about Yusuf is what? When they called him a thief. That's the only time we saw them reference Yusuf alayhi salam. And now he's saying, remember the violation you did against Yusuf? The line you crossed against Yusuf? The crime you committed when it came to Yusuf? So long ago, min qabl. He's reminding them of the crime they committed with Yusuf. Guess what that means? That means he put that in a shelf for a long time. He put it away. But he couldn't keep it in there. It came back and hit him. When he imagined the father's pain, he relived the father's pain the first time. He relived the father's words, Wallahu al-musta'an ala ma tasifun. Only Allah's help can be sought against what you're describing, meaning you are on one side and Allah is on the other. I don't want to be on the opposite side with a statement made about Allah. I can't do that anymore, and I can't do that to my dad anymore. Remember what we've done. Do you know what you even did to Yusuf? And if you go back to the wording of the ayah, do you not know? Have you not known? Do they know what they did to Yusuf? Yeah, but there's two kinds of knowing, isn't it? There's knowing, and then there's realizing. You know when you say to somebody when they messed up, do you even know what you've done? You ever heard that? Do you even know what you've done? And you know what that means? Do you realize how serious it is what you did? What a grave sin it is that you committed? How evil it was that you did? Were you not in your senses? Was a part of you just unaware? Did you put a part of your, like Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, when he talked to people who left Islam for a poet, and they got impressed with his fake Quran, and he heard some of their Quran, it was so absurd. He said, كَيْفَ يَذْهَبُ بِعُقُولِكُمْ? How did he get rid of your intellects? How did he remove your brains? Did you not know? How did you not know? And now he's saying that to them as if I'm actually coming to terms with the fact that I committed a great evil with you guys, but are you guys still blind? Do you guys still not know? Alam ta'lamu? We go back to Alam ta'lamu. Now what did he say? What you did wrong with Yusuf. And this is again an echo from the father's words before the father left them. Because before they left for Egypt, the father said, قَالَ هَلْ آمَنُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ إِلَّا كَمَا أَمِنْتُكُمْ عَلَىٰ أَخِيهِ مِنْ قَبْلِ. Should I trust him with you? Should I entrust you with Binyamin the way I entrusted you with his brother so long ago? So long ago, min qablu. And what did he say? وَمِن قَبْلُ مَا فَرَّطْتُمْ فِي Yusuf. And by the way, the father, Yaqub alayhi salam, didn't say you did to Yusuf. He said his brother. He said what? His brother. But nowadays even there's a campaign. Say his name. Say her name. Say the victim's name. Face what you did. And he's facing what he says Yusuf's name. He doesn't say his brother. Now notice previously in the text we saw what? When they were talking about Binyamin being a thief, they said he used to have a brother that was a thief too. That stole also. They didn't say Yusuf's name, did they? Man, that would have been interesting, right? If they said his name, that would have been a different situation. But here, he's not just saying his brother. He's not saying his brother. He's saying his name. He's acknowledging something that he did wrong. He's having a very profound moment of coming back. This is what you call a flicker, right? You're in the dark for so long. Allah describes sometimes people can spiral into darkness for so long and keep going deep and deep. He describes it, he compares it to like somebody drowning in the ocean. And as you drown in the ocean, light refracts, right? So there's lesser and lesser and lesser light as you get deeper and deeper in the ocean, right? And then he says there are clouds, and on top of that cloud, there's a massive wave. And above that wave, there are dark clouds. So sun isn't getting through anyway. And whatever sun would get through, there's a dark cloud. And under that dark cloud, there are waves upon, and there's a massive wave, and there's a wave above that, and there's a person way deep inside. Fi bahrin duji. And what does Allah say when someone's in the bottom of that depth? You know, there's absolutely zero light down there. Zero light. What that means is if you moved your hand like that, you wouldn't see it, right? Allah didn't say that. He said, إِذَا أَخْرَجَ يَدَهُ لَمْ يَكَدْ يَرَاهَا. He said, when he takes his hand out, it's almost as if he can't see it. You see, in Surah An-Nur, we expected the words, when he takes his hand out, he can't see it. He's blind. Allah says, when he takes his hand out, he almost can't see it. You know what Allah is telling us? You could be in the depths of sin. You could be so far gone for so many years. You could have done something and never thought about it, never repented, never shed a tear, never had any remorse for years and years and years. But there's some part of your conscience, some light that Allah put inside you that will not give up, because that light is the one that's going to testify against you on Judgment Day. That bulb has got very weak battery, but it's still got battery. And when you see your actions, there's a flicker that tells you this is wrong. There's still, and what that tells you is it doesn't matter how deep a person goes into sin, there's still hope for them. They can still find a way. They're not blind yet. They're still not blind. They can still see some of their hand, which means they can see their actions. That hand is a pretty interesting analogy there, right? Lam yakad yaraha. What I'm trying to say is he's seeing his hand. And now he's telling, you don't see it? You don't see what you did to Yusuf? And that's again an echo from the father's words. And then he adds falan abraha al-arda. I'll come back to that, but falan abraha al-arda, because I want to finish this echo discussion. Then I will not depart from the land. I'm translating briefly without going into detail right now. I will not give up this land. I'm not leaving here. I'm going to stick here. I'm standing my ground. Hatta ya'zana li abi, until my father gives me permission. I will not leave this land until my father gives me permission. This is also an echo. Why? Because the father made them promise, illa an yuhata bikum, you will bring him back to me unless you get surrounded. Remember that? And I don't know if dad will consider this as an excuse enough. And so if I can't justify this and dad doesn't say it's okay for you to come home, I'm not even coming home, because I consider myself breaking the violation. I'm scared that I'm violating that covenant I made with my father. The thing is, this time it would be okay for him to go back, wouldn't it? It would be okay for him to go back because he didn't break the rule. The rule was if you get surrounded, you can't do anything. Were they surrounded by the authorities? Yeah. So he didn't break the rule that the father set. But now when the conscience has woken up, you're even thinking twice if you're doing the right thing. You want to be on the side of caution, even if you're technically okay. I just want to make double sure, triple sure that I'm okay. There's a big difference between someone who just wants something to be halal and someone else who wants to double check, triple check, quadruple check, and just wanted to make sure that it's completely halal before I engage in something. Right? There's a difference, isn't there? There are some people that just want to look at something and just say, how can I make this halal? That's one attitude. And the other is, it's some people are telling me it's halal, but I just want to make sure. I just really want to make sure. I want to make sure I'm not on the wrong side of Allah's pleasure. So I'm not going to step into that. I'm not going to console myself and say, oh, it's okay, Allah understands. Oh, he understands. Yeah, that's why he told us what to do and what not to do. So you don't use Allah. Allah understands to justify that you don't want to understand, right? That's what people do sometimes. So may Allah not make us from those kinds of people. So now he is siding with caution. What does that tell you? He has yet another step towards his awakening. He's becoming more conscious about what is right and what is wrong. And I want to make sure I do right by dad this time. So until dad says I can come back, I'm not leaving Egypt. You guys go ahead. And he's the one in charge. We already read that he's the one in charge. So he's making this statement. And then again, this is an echo of the father's condition. And now look at what he says at the end. أَوْ يَحْكُمَ اللَّهُ لِي, or unless, the only way I'll come back is if dad allows me to and says it's okay for me to come back, or Allah makes a decision for me and he is the best of all who can make decisions. Or Allah decides something for me, Allah opens a verdict for me, meaning Allah decrees something, like for example, maybe miraculously Binyamin is released, right? That would be Allah's decision. Or Allah's decision, there's a dark side to it too. Maybe Allah decides that I'll die here. Because the qadr of Allah can also be what? Death. So either Allah will make this easy for me and he will open the doors for Binyamin to get out and I can come back with him. That would be Allah's decree. Or I will die here if I don't get dad's permission. That would be Allah's decree. But Allah is the best of all who makes decisions. Notice how he's leaving the matter in Allah's hands. This is unique, isn't it? We haven't heard the brothers talk like this, anybody. And now he's invoking Allah in this way. And this statement alone, أَوْ يَحْكُمَ اللَّهُ لِي وَهُوَ خَيْرُ الْحَاكِمِينَ, that or Allah will make a verdict for me and he's the best of all that makes verdicts. That statement itself is actually an echo for what the father said. When the father told him, alayhi salam, to go into Egypt from different doors, remember? The end of that statement was, إِنِ الْحُكْمُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ, the verdict belongs to nobody except Allah. عَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ, on him alone I rely. وَعَلَيْهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُتَوَكِّلُونَ, and for those people that are going to put their trust, they should absolutely put their trust in Allah. And look at this older son, now he's putting his trust in Allah. Isn't that remarkable? Like every statement is now in some way or the other going back to the father. Going back to the Father and going back to Allah, two entities. He's making right. So what does it mean when someone finds their way back to Allah? It means they do right by the people that they hurt and they do right by Allah. Because you violated two. You didn't violate one. You didn't commit a crime against one, you committed a crime against two. And there's never just one. It's, if you hurt someone, you hurt Allah's creation. So you committed a crime against Allah too. Right? So he has to go back to Allah and to his Father. He has to make it right. He has to do right by Allah, do right by his father, right? And that's the way back for someone who's drowned. And it's a remarkable ayah. If you study, or if you've been listening and getting some good sleep from the beginning of this series, you've heard me talk about the brothers in not the most glaring terms. And I've tried to paint a picture as the Quran paints it. And the Quran is not very kind in depicting their wrongdoings. It depicts them, very blatantly. And I've tried to describe that to you very blatantly. But yet when one of them is having a moment of redemption and there's a flicker of light and he can see his hand, the Quran gives credit where it's due. You know what that means? Allah does not consider people black and white, good and evil. Allah considers people can have evil episodes. Maybe those episodes can last years, but until you're drawing breath, a judgment has not been passed on you. There's still room for you to come back. And that's on you. That's entirely on you. It also means that the father who was a prophet, who's giving them sermon and trying to give them advice and giving them wisdom, and it falls on deaf ears. Maybe you think it fell on deaf ears, but eventually it trickled in, didn't it? And it just had to come out at the right moment. And it's pretty crazy that it came out at a moment where he's farthest away from his father. He's not even in front of his father right now, and his conscience has awoken up. He's just become a different person. He's a completely different character from the brothers that what we've been used to seeing. He's even scolding them, as we saw. So now what I want to do is go back a little bit in this ayah and just some things. I'll try to go through this rather quickly, but I want you guys to appreciate some things about the language of this ayah. First thing in the language of this ayah that's very unique, this only happens twice in the Quran, is when he says, أن أباكم قد أخذ عليكم موثقا. عليكم موثقا. أخذ موثقا or أخذ ميثاقا in Arabic, to take a covenant, comes with the preposition min. So أخذنا من بني إسرائيل ميثاقهم. Okay. وأخذنا منكم ميثاقا غليظا. The preposition used is min, which means from, which means take a promise from someone. The word is from, min. But here we don't find min, we find ala. And ala is used here, and it's used only once in Surah Al-A'raf. Every other instance of akhad al-mithaq, use or ahad or anything like that, uses the preposition min. So it's a different preposition. So Sohaib and I, today, I brought this question up to him. Hey, it's ala here. Isn't it min all the time in the Quran? Well, what happened? Did anybody talk about this? So we looked at Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi and we didn't find anything. Then we looked at At-Tahrir wa Tanweer and we didn't find anything. Then we looked at al-Shinqiti and we didn't find anything. And then we looked at Alusi and we didn't find anything. And then we looked at then I looked at Al-Qasimi, Al-Shawkani, Ibn Kathir, Al-Tabari, Al-Qurtubi. I just went on a tear today in my library. Just, hey, you look at this one, I'll look at this one. Did he say something? Did he say something? Did he say something? And eventually, when we exhausted tafasir, I'm like, let me look at the Urdu sources, see if they said anything. So I looked at Madhari, Ma'arif al-Quran. I mean, I said a slice of the Quran. Didn't find anything. Then I'm like, okay, maybe I'rab books have, because I'rab books are just breaking down the grammar, right? So I have I'rab al-Mufassal li Kitabillah al-Murattal. I open up the grammatical analysis, open it up. No, it just says Jar Majrur Muta'alliqun bil Fi'l. It doesn't tell us why. It just says and they just move on from this part. And so we're both scratching our heads like, what happened here? Like, ain't nobody talk about this? But why is it bugging us? Because everywhere else in Quran, it's min. And I didn't know for sure if it's everywhere in min. So we went to this website. Inshallah, eventually when many of you become Quran students and Arabic students of mine, then I'll introduce you to some of these sources and how to use them. So I had him go to readverse.com with me, and we looked up all the ayat that have akhada in them, and scanned through all 51 instances and found only 2 ayat, this one and an ayah in Surah Al-A'raf. And so here are some of our conclusions based on the word ala, not based on what we read in tafsir. Okay, so this is a disclaimer. So instead of saying, the brother saying, your father took a promise from you, I'm going to put this in literal English, your father took a covenant, sacred covenant, over you. Instead of from you, what did he say? Over you. You know what that means? Listen, it's hanging over your heads. This is something binding. You didn't just make a promise to him and it disappeared. It's like a cloud over you. It's going to follow you everywhere you go. It's an obligation you have. You can't escape it. It's on top of you. It's right there. Don't pretend that you're free. You know, it's a very powerful use of that preposition. It's an unusual usage of that preposition, and Allah calling special attention to his awakening, and how when someone wakes up, they realize that they didn't just make a promise to Allah, or Allah just didn't take a promise from them, but Allah took a promise that hangs over them. They just didn't look up. They didn't realize that it was there. That they're still responsible. You can act like you're not responsible, but you still are. You need to wake up. So that's inside the word ala. The other remarkable thing is long discussions about وَمِن قَبْلُ مَا فَرَّطْتُمْ فِي Yusuf. Now I'm going to make you feel only a little bit bad, and I'll translate easily, but I will make you feel a little bit bad at least about not starting your Arabic studies yet. You don't have to be an expert, but you got to start. There's no excuse for not starting. وَمِن قَبْلُ مَا فَرَّطْتُمْ فِي Yusuf. The Mufassirun have 3 grammatical explanations. What is it doing here? One explanation is the ma is zaida. This is Alusi's inclination. That ma is zaida. And others before him have also said that. What that means in translation is that the ma wouldn't be translated. Okay? So, and the way we would translate that is, didn't you know that your father has taken a promise from you, sacred from Allah, that hangs over you? Not to mention, you had done so much wrong to Yusuf so long ago. Not to mention, so long ago you did so much wrong to Yusuf. It's ma'tuf like that. And I didn't say the word what. I didn't say, not to mention what you did to Yusuf. I didn't say that. So the word what is omitted because it's zaida. Now the grammar students would say, if ma is zaida, what is it doing there? Because there's nothing zaid in the Quran. The thing is, this is why you have to get out of kindergarten in Arabic grammar and go to elementary school in Arabic grammar. The ma that is zaida in nahu does not mean it is zaida in balagha. So it's just something is what's called superfluous, meaning the sentence would work without it. Then why is it there? It's like extra? Well, I thought nothing in the Quran is extra. Listen, student, the ma here means mubalagha. And the way you would translate that is the farrattum would have an exclamation mark. What violations you did? Not to mention the violations you did when it came to Yusuf so long ago? Is it because it's been so long you forgot? So there's a yelling going on if you consider ma zaida. And that also gives you the intensity with which this brother is speaking and how his awakening is like a pretty serious awakening. The second interpretation of ma is that this is a maf'ul bihi, and there's two ways to look at it. It's a maf'ul bihi ma masdariya and maf'ul bihi ma mawsula. One day all of this will make sense to you and you'll love it. But right now you just need to feel bad a little bit. But I'll get to the easy translations in a sec. Then there would be maf'ul bihi of alam ta'lamu. If it's masdariya, it would be alam ta'lamu tafritakum bi Yusufa min qabl, or fi Yusufa min qabl, meaning don't you know A and don't you know B? What's don't you know A? Don't you know your father made a promise that hangs over you? That's A. And don't you know what you did with Yusuf so long ago? In the matter of what wrong you committed, how you fell short when it came to Yusuf, how you shortchanged him, that would be B. So there's don't you know has two objects. Don't you know A and don't you know B? That would be a maf'ul bihi. And then the masdariya and the mawsula are very similar. One translation would be your violations or your wrongings. That would be the masdariya translation. And what you did wrong would be the mawsula translation. So they're similar in English anyway. Then finally, this could be that the ma here, ma farrattum, is actually fi mahalli raf'. It's not fi mahal nasab maf'ul bihi. It's fi mahal raf' mubtada. And the min qabl is muta'alliq bil khabar muqaddam, and fi Yusuf is muta'alliq bil khabar mu'akhar. What that means is, here's how I would translate that. Don't you know that your father has taken a promise from you, sacred from Allah, that hangs over you? That's one part. And then he adds a new sentence. This would be a completely new sentence. And what you did with Yusuf was so long ago. And so long ago is what you had done with Yusuf. Do you not remember? Like it's a separate sentence. And he adds that in at the end. وَمِن قَبْلُ مَا فَرَّطْتُمْ فِي يُوسُف. So those are the three ways, and each of them kind of highlights a different dimension, right? So if you look at the first one that I said, by the time he got to Yusuf, he combined these two as if it's one crime. If you look at ma zaida. If you look at maf'ul bihi, he's actually saying you had done this and you had done this before. So he's not combining them, but he's saying you're committing a crime, and you know what? Long time ago, you forgot that you've done this already. Maybe I need to remind you. And in the third case, he's just reminding him of this crime. And by the way, so long ago, what did you do with Yusuf? So he's adding that in as an added slap at the end. And that would be the third. So there is a relationship between grammar and meaning. Every time you have a particular kind of grammatical interpretation, analysis, it leads to a different flavor in translation, which is why translating Quran is such a beautiful challenge. A translator has to pick one. Like Allah is saying many things in one, and you have to pick one, and you have to be honest about the fact that you had to let other things go. Because in the English translation, you can't possibly capture everything. One of the projects Sheikh Suhaib and I have one day, our dream in the future, is to actually do a work on the al-wujuh wa nadha'ir fil Quran, meaning how an ayah can be translated in these several different ways. Grammatically possible, with an explanation, a source code behind each. If you'll consider this grammatical explanation, this would be the meaning. If you consider B, this would be the meaning. If you consider C, this would be the meaning. And knowing the kind of geek that he is, mashallah, he'd actually go back and say, well, this scholar agrees with this one more, this one with this one more, this one with this one more, and this one criticizes this one for ABC, and this one for DEF. And by that time, my brain melts and I just want to play Street Fighter or something to recover my humanity. But anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you about the ma farrattum fi Yusuf min qabl. Okay, or min qabl ma farrattum fi Yusuf. Now, falan abrah al-arda. A little bit about lan abrah al-arda. That I will not leave the land. He says, I will not leave the land. Bariha or barah in Arabic is used for the soil or sand that the winds blow far and wide. Something that moves far and wide is called barah. That's why even the sun changing its positions in ancient Arabic was also called barah, actually. from it, the verb there's a naqis or an incomplete verb and a complete verb, and it became لا أبرح, like in Surah Al-Kahf, لا أبرح حتى أبلغ مجمع البحرين أو أمضي حقبة. لا أبرح means I will not shift from my place. Remember the imageries of the sand shifting? I will be, it's like saying, I will not be like the sand that shifts or the sun that moves from its position. I will stand my ground. And they use this and then add a verb to it, right? I will stay. So here he says, لن أبرح الأرض فلن أبرح الأرض. I will not shift from this land. I am not budging 1 foot. I'm staying put here. I'm not moving until Father gives me permission. Until my father gives me permission. So that's actually interesting. By the way, it should be noted that يَأْذَنَ لِي أَبِي has 3 subtleties. When he says, my father gives me permission. The first subtlety is li is muqaddam, meaning my father specifically gives me permission. Not because his brothers could come and say, well, he said if you're surrounded, it's fine. So he has given you permission. Bro, no, he needs to give explicit permission exclusively to me. It needs to be specific to me, not the general conversation we had before we left. So that's the li muqaddam. It was mentioned earlier. You wouldn't get that if you say ya'dhana abi li, but you will get that if you say ya'dhana li abi, which is what the Quran says. The other interesting thing is, remember when they were talking about the father, they said he has a father. What's he calling him now? My father. He's calling him my father. And if you notice, right before that, he said, your father took a promise from you. He's your dad. You need to be loyal to your dad. Well, if you're not going to be loyal to your dad, I'm not moving until my dad gives me permission. If you don't want to act like he's your dad, I'm still going to respect him as if he's my dad. He didn't say our father, because clearly we don't see him the same. So you have your version of dad in your mind, I have mine. And the way I see my father, I will seek his permission. فَلَنْ أَبْرَحَ الْأَرْضَ حَتَّى يَأْذَنَ لِي أَبِي. It's really beautiful that he says that. Ya'dhana has 2 dimensions, to give permission and also to give an ear, from udhun, right? So maybe even implied that until I know for a fact that dad has said this and my ear here verified, because he knows his brothers are liars too. You know? So there's that dimension in that too. Now, fine, he says, he's already, now you've got 2 brothers who've made up their mind. Yusuf has made up his mind, I'm not giving up Binyamin. The oldest one has made up his mind, I'm not leaving this group. I'm not leaving this land until whatever happens. I've explained that to you. Now, it's almost as if they say, well, what do you want us to do? You're not going to leave. What are we going to do? So now he gives them instructions in 81. Irji'u ila abikum. Go back to your father. It's just, he just said my father, and now he's going back to what? Your father. Go back to your father has 2 dimensions. Physically go back to your father and make things right. Go back to your dad. When you say go back to someone, also means make things right with them. So go back to him and be honest with him this time. You know, there's the beginning of the story, we saw that they went back to dad and lied, remember? So go back to dad and be honest this time. So go back to dad and say this. Irji'u ila abikum faqulu, then say, Ya abana inna ibnaka saraqi. Our father, there's no doubt about it, your son has stolen. Your son has stolen. It's interesting, they don't say, go back and say, our brother has stolen, or Binyamin has stolen. It's your son has stolen, meaning this is not our fault. He did this. The thing came out of his bag. This is why there's no doubt about it, he's stolen. Okay, so when they say this, now, even though there's flickers of light and he's having redemption, we're not going to paint him entirely as black or entirely as white. There's a gray. So here he's still throwing his brother under the bus, yes or no? Go back and tell him your son, your beloved son that you love so much and trust so much and never wanted to let go. Well, he got out and the first thing he did is he stole. Inna ibnaka saraq, without a doubt. So present this as a fact. Now, وَمَا شَهِدْنَا إِلَّا بِمَا عَلِمْنَا, and we can't testify. We're not testifying to anything except what we know. Okay, or we're not bearing witness to anything except that what we know. Now, what does that mean? All we know is the cup was found in his bag. All we know is everybody saw it. All we're testifying to you is what we saw, what we came to know. We don't know anymore. How did the cup end up there? When was it put there? When did he steal it? Did he steal? We don't know any of that. By the way, even in those words, we're only testifying. We're not testifying to anything except what we've come to know. Isn't there some doubt in those words? So first they came out and said what? No doubt your son has stolen. But now they're saying, but what? I mean, that's all we saw. We can only tell you what we know from what we saw. That's all we could say. So they're as sure as they are, they're also not sure. They can't, because the father didn't buy it. Because the oldest son is saying, when you go tell father, there's no doubt about it, your son has stolen, I can tell you he's not going to believe you. And when he doesn't believe you, you need to say, we can only testify to what we came to know. Here's the facts. Here's what we know. مَا عَلِمْنَا. Now, وَمَا كُنَّا لِلْغَيْبِ حَافِظِينَ. And we are not guardians over the unseen. By the way, there's a subtle pun that may or may not be intended by the text. Allahu a'lam. But you know how they said, well, if he stole, we kind of knew it. So we're only testifying to something we kind of already knew he was going to do anyway. He's from the thief side of the family. So there's a little bit of a dig maybe involved in, ma shahidna illa ma alimna. But then they say, وَمَا كُنَّا لِلْغَيْبِ حَافِظِينَ. We couldn't possibly be guarding something that is in the unseen. Well, what does that mean? We can't possibly guard what is in the unseen or be guardians of the unseen. Well, one thing it means is we didn't know he was going to steal. So how are we supposed to guard against that? We guarded him against thieves and robbers and whatever else, but we didn't know he was going to be a thief himself. How could we have known? That was completely unknown to us. It was ghaib to us. The judge says in Old Arabic, ghaib can also mean nighttime. We can't guard what happens at nighttime. Maybe he stole at nighttime when we were all asleep. How are we supposed to watch over that? So that's another interpretation of وَمَا كُنَّا لِلْغَيْبِ حَافِظِينَ. Then, our brother wasn't always under our watch. Yusuf had taken him with him, and we didn't have access to him because he was with Yusuf. I remember when they were in private and they had this conversation, and they're in the ghaib from that, they're in the unseen from that because they don't have access to those quarters and those special authorized rooms. So what happened there? How can we safeguard something we had no access to? There's no way we could have done that. And it's interesting that they say the word hafidhin because they come back and they're actually responding to what they said earlier. This is important now. When they were taking Binyamin, they said, وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We will be guardians over him. We will be what? Guardians over him. And then when the dad insisted no, they said, نَحْفَظُ أَخَانَا. We will guard our brother. And now they're using the same word guard. When you go back to that and say, we can't guard what we can't see. I mean, how do you expect us to guard that? That's not our fault. So we're not to blame here. وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةِ. Dad, ask the town. Because I would venture to say that ayah number 82 could be the brothers talking to father. But it could also be, you remember in ayah number 81, the ayah says, tell father this. Tell father, quote. And the quote is continuing. So the quote could be continuing until the end of 82, or it's just 81, and in 82 they're now talking to dad. There's a switch of scene happening. I'll explain that to you guys tomorrow, inshallah. But anyway, was'al al-qarya, ask the town, which means was'al ahl al-qarya, ask the people of the town. When you say ask the city, what does that mean in any language? Ask the city means what? Ask the people of the city. What others say, they were being dramatic in their language. Ask the walls, ask the streets. They will testify that we're telling the truth. Ask the trees, And then what is the town? It's Egypt, according to most mufassirun. Ask all of Egypt. Ask the city in which we were. Okay, fine. Ask anybody in the city. Okay, you don't have access to the city. How are you going to go back all the way to Egypt and ask? You know what? And even ask anybody in the caravan among whom we came back and among whom we turned around when the cops said, hey, you're thieves, and we all turned around. It wasn't just us. It was like a couple of hundred people. You can pick any one of them and ask what happened. Because remember, they were part of a larger caravan. Al-'ira allati aqbalna fiha. Aqbalna fiha could be a duality. One, the caravan that turned back when the cops called us out. They were all witness. You can pick any of them. And aqbalna fiha could be, you can ask the caravan that just came back with us. Because aqbalna can have both of those meanings. Because it was aqbalu, right? In that ayah, they turned back and faced them. So the caravan that has come back, was actually witness to that event too, you can go ask any of them. Why are they adding that? Because we know that our testimony is probably not enough for you. And the brother's smart enough to know when you go back to dad, you need to let him know that we realize that we don't exactly earn your trust. So we're letting you know this is what happened. But if you don't believe us, you can ask the town. You can ask anybody in the city. This is known news now. And you can ask anybody who came in that caravan. This is them. This is, the older brother letting them know, listen, you have no credibility with dad. Tell him what happened, but also tell him the credibility to your statements will not come from you. It's okay. You can find whatever witnesses because we are telling the truth. And look at the final words, and we'll end with that. وَإِنَّا لَصَادِقُونَ. And there's no doubt about it. We're telling the truth. We're absolutely telling the truth. Why is this important, guys? Because so many years ago, they came back with a shirt with blood on it. And they said, you're not going to believe us. وَلَوْ كُنَّا صَادِقِينَ. Even if we'd been telling the truth, you wouldn't believe us. And now they say, and we're definitely telling the truth, as if they're saying, but this time we're telling the truth. Which is kind of incriminating about the last time, isn't it? You know what, Dad? We're actually telling the truth this time. وَإِنَّا لَصَادِقُونَ. Go tell Dad all of this. This is now what the brother has told them. They're going to come all the way back to Egypt or to Canaan, and then they're going to have this conversation with Yaqub alayhi salam, and inshallah we'll pick up from where this carries on. Actually, tomorrow I'm not going to talk to you guys about the next ayah. Tomorrow we'll have a session on this portion of the story as talked about in the Bible. So we'll finish that portion inshallah and then reconvene on Monday with tafsir of the rest of the ayat. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ani wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. And I know I promised you guys a session on the evil eye. It's coming, maybe Thursday, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.